Austin here in Visico, Sarajevo, doing my final exam video. Have behind me actually this wonderful nature at the apartment that I'm at, and it is the pyramid. Um, yeah, still covered in 6 to 9 feet of vegetation. So it's, but if you looked at a picture from the aerial view, you'd be able to see the craziness of the structure. Um, so the first question: why is it important that people see famous works of art? I'm not too sure if it is important in general, just for people to be able to see art, um, because I think it's more important if they're educated or experienced or have a lot of wisdom and gratitude for what it is that they're seeing. After this experience of going to so many art museums and art installations so quickly, and seeing a lot of people still lost in these processes of it being the next Instagram picture that can make them famous or look good, and not having a real appreciation. And even myself, like, having instances where I really wanted to know something about a piece so I could appreciate it more, and I couldn't find any information about it. And yeah, it made me feel like maybe that's just personally for me. I would want to know sometimes the history and the origin and stuff like that. Um, but yeah. Oh, so this kind of ties into like the next question of how it's important to me. I had like an example of not always knowing what was going on with Cubist style and Surrealist and Expressionist, and that's Impressionist. That I get that that's like maybe a bit of the point, but cube to pinpoint specifically Cubist, it's definitely meant to have an impact. A lot of Pablo Picasso's works are meant to be like anti-war messages, and I had no idea about that, even though like I knew he was like a really famous like abstract Cubist artist. And then when it came to me like reading the information and discovering that, it like made the impact like way more significant, being able to like feel like what message he was trying to put out there about this thing. um yeah, I if I had to give like a definitive answer to the question though, and the same applies for why I find it's important for me to see art. I believe, I have a hope here that art assists in eliminating negative bias and negative perspectives. I have a good example here. The Puritan notion in the United States of nudity inherently being sexual and uncomfortable to look at. You know, After a certain amount of art that I've seen, I of looking at nude paintings and sculptures, and I hope that Americans and others that tend to feel a certain discomfort around nudity feel the same way. After a certain amount of looking at them and having a taboo-esque, uncomfortable feeling arising inside of me, the feeling started to go away, and I began to see it more as something that somebody else created that put in so much effort and into creating something really grand. And I think that's pretty significant. So this is the next one. Consider all the people, costs, and resources. Comment on what those actions, how those actions about the societies preserving their art. How does it apply to the U.S.? This kind of reminds me of the USA's understanding that we have a worldwide obligation to help, like we did in World War I and World War II eventually. And then Ian giving us a good tidbit where he said, like, after the Great War, we didn't really help. We just came and like shut everybody down, shut everybody up, and then like they had to pick the pieces back themselves. But after the Second World War, we were like, no, we should probably help. And so us building them up turned our original enemies into our allies, right? I think it's fascinating that after all of that, all of these European countries sought to use so much of their resources to make sure that their art was well preserved. They repaired all of their ancient architecture, their buildings where they could, their churches, took all of what the art was that was left that wasn't damaged, and made it into these beautiful, extravagant museums. The aspect of how it reflects on the US is a difficult one, though, because the country is relatively young, right? And in general, I can't help but just still see the prominent echoes of desecrating the previous indigenous populations that lived in North America and the United States area. My family is Choctaw, and we're still a part of the tribe. And Choctaw is one of the 5 civilized tribes that was moved in 1831, walking the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma out of the area in Mississippi and Alabama that used to be Choctaw Nation. And we'd been fighting for many decades for the sacred site, the sacred mound called Naniawaya in Mississippi to be returned, and it was only returned in 2018. Another great example is Mount Rushmore. Not too many people know that the mountainside used to be a sacred site for prayer and worship for the Lakota people. And while that might be like nature's beauty, still is its own art. Its own art form is nature. And it was desecrated, and now we have these policies in place to preserve it in the name of U.S. presidents. But really, like, it probably should just be destroyed in some way and brought back to just being a regular rock that is, and returned to the Lakota descendants. It's kind of strange though, because when I found myself reflecting on this, it's the same as like there's so much history in general, and we just have like the historical record of it in the United States more recently with the indigenous populations being affected the way they were. But in Europe and in Asia, they've had like kingdoms and civilizations rise up and fall and rise up and fall and conquer and go through this. The Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Huns, the Austro-Hungarians, the Ottomans. So all throughout that time period likely was like kingdoms that were taken over and destroyed, and history that was destroyed. And so, but we just don't have a lot of historical record of what may have been lost, and what was probably lost to history by the winners. But because we still do have the history relative to what's recent, because it's only in the past 200 years, less than 200 years really, of it happening in the U.S., I do feel there's a moral obligation there to honor indigenous people in that way. And that's it's a different form of art, right? It's peoples that are, again, seeing nature around them as their art. But I still think it's important that that would be a good way for the U.S. to be able to take responsibility and help the preservation continue. The next one, what do you think about people risking their lives for art? I think it's really powerful and wonderful. It expresses how much has been lost over the centuries, but the things that have continued to stay around and be preserved, we can have like an immense more gratitude for, to know that like there was so much effort put into these things to keep it around. Uh, you know, for example, like when the Nazis were starting to gain power, Picasso made sure his most significant anti-war art pieces were moved to New York, and it's highly likely there were other artists out there in Europe that during that time period that weren't as ready or prepared or resourceful, and then they didn't really get their art preserved at all and got it destroyed in some way. Yeah, and that's still only recent. That's not even 100 years ago. So it's phenomenal to think of like all of this other stuff that's still around. It's beautiful to think of like how people fight for it, and to the risking their lives, like the question says. It's phenomenal. When I was in the parliament in Budapest in Hungary, the Hungarian parliament, and learned that there were photographs of Parliament made in the 1930s. It was just a photographer who was visiting, and they only recently rediscovered those photos in a cache, and now they're undoing the Soviet Union repairs and revisions that were made after a lot of it got destroyed in World War II, and revising it back to what its original architectural vision was. And that's just like a beautiful strike of luck that the wrong person didn't find these photographs. It's possible that if the Soviets found those photographs, they would be like, no, we're just going to keep it like how we like it, and toss it, and not even, yeah. So it's another really cool example, actually. It's art of another art, right? Photography of architecture. Explain the moments you experienced wonder. I definitely experienced wonder constantly. It was a really fun ride. I really appreciate the both of you for taking me on this ride, and you guys worked so hard, and I really saw and appreciate the hard work that you did. Um, if I had to be pretty particular, there's three significant moments. The one was in the map room in the Vatican. You know, my mom first taught me, I was pretty young. I was like 7 or 8, how to read a map. And so it's always had like a significant echoing uh, ben, uh, benevolence to how much it assisted me and helped me to transform in a really positive way my reflections on maps and how it sort of brings the world together through art. And it was really moved me. Hey guys. um, the next one was the Pantheon in Rome. It was so phenomenal to think like that because the Catholics destroyed so many things, to think like that this is what remains and it's still here today and still so powerful of a place with the dome, the way that its design was, that was just crazy to think about. And then the last one I wanted to mention is the Da Vinci paintings in the Uffizi Gallery. I'd never seen Da Vinci paintings. I try not to make too much significance of something if I haven't seen it myself personally, so I didn't really know what the fuss is. I know he didn't really make that many paintings, actually. Um, but yeah, there was something really strange about seeing his paintings that just gave me goosebumps as soon as I saw them. And it was kind of funny too, because I don't even think I looked at the name right away. Yeah, I got to the room and it was, it was packed because the Uffizi Gallery was crazy packed. And I remember like, whoa, like looking really intensely and then getting like so much stimulation, physically speaking and visually speaking, on a crazy level. And then feeling the goosebumps and just a super intense energy. And then I like looked at the name and I was like, oh, this is the Da Vinci paintings. Whoa, this man was on a crazy other planet when he was making this stuff. And the final question: how do you think this trip and your experience will affect your future self? I didn't really write anything down because I figured I was going to end up making such a long video. I could just talk about things all the time, I guess. Yeah, I can imagine you have made so many questions just in case any of the students were having a difficult time being able to come up with answers. Um, you know, I'd say the biggest thing, interestingly enough, is a realization of possibly seeing myself want to teach in some way. I can't see myself being a teacher like in a school or a professor or anything like that, quite at that level, but seeing the amount of passion you guys used and utilized and throughout the moments, and yeah, Ian, you really did a phenomenal job at like saying a bunch of things, even if it didn't have anything to do with art, that were so well, beautifully articulated and inspirational, and made me like aspire to like want to be able to have that type of charisma that can get the wheels turning. And it did occur actually. Whenever I was in Belgrade, Serbia for a night, and I went out with a few people in my hostel. One person was 30 and then the other was 26 and the other was 23. A girl from Brussels, a guy from Trinidad, and a guy from Italy who's traveled a lot, and he spent a long time in Serbia. Um, yeah, they got to like asking me questions that I started to speak and just kept talking and talking. And at some point, I was trying to be humble to be like, oh, I don't mean to be like the only person that's talking. And they gave me really positive feedback. They were like, no, I really appreciate like what your outlooks are and your perspectives are, that really are challenging perspectives and challenging bias, and trying to see something that's more of a hopeful, realistic perspective. And getting positive feedback from them. And afterwards, I found myself thinking about about our journey together in the 2 weeks, during the 2 week time frame of hearing Darius speaking and Ian speaking and Burns speaking and Becca. And yeah, and I just felt like, wow, already like it had like such a profound ripple effect that's so positive. And so really appreciate you guys for doing all of that. I hope I can pass by you from time to time on campus. Thank you so much. Bye bye.